I matched with a guy on Tinder. He looked really cute in his profile pictures, with a kind smile and clean-cut appearance. His profile said he had a solid career too, something in finance, which made me think he had his life together. I was excited at first. We exchanged a few messages and I liked how confident he seemed. But then, things started to feel off. His messages quickly got weird. He didn't make small talk or ask me about my life like most people do. Instead, he jumped straight into telling me things like how he wanted to squeeze me really hard between his arms. I remember reading that first message and feeling this knot in my stomach. It wasn't the kind of flirty comment you'd expect. It sounded more like something you'd hear from a guy with a strange obsession. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe he was just being awkward. But then he escalated. His next message said something about how he wanted to capture me, like I was some kind of prize or possession. That's when I started feeling genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't know this guy at all. He was a complete stranger from Tinder, and here he was talking about owning me like I was an object. His tone in the messages was getting more intense too. Instead of light conversation or trying to get to know me, he was going on about how I would be his property for life. That sent chills through me. I didn't even want to respond. In fact, I didn't. I blocked him immediately. Something about the whole interaction felt seriously wrong, and I didn't want to take any chances with someone who could turn out to be dangerous. Blocking him felt like the safest move. Normally, when you block someone on an app like Tinder, that's the end of it. But this wasn't a normal situation. A week later, I found a letter in my mailbox. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was used to getting the occasional flyer or random mail. But when I opened the envelope and saw the handwriting, my stomach sank. The letter was from him, the guy I had blocked on Tinder. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Somehow he had found out where I lived. The letter wasn't long, but it was clear. He wanted me to unblock him, and if I didn't, he threatened to meet me in person. That was the moment when I realised this was serious. How had he gotten my address? I'd never shared it with anyone on Tinder, let alone someone I'd blocked. My hands were shaking as I folded the letter back up. The thought of this stranger knowing where I lived and threatening me was terrifying. I knew I needed help, so I called the police. They told me to come in so they could examine the letter for any clues. One of the officers I spoke to mentioned that it was possible the guy's Tinder profile wasn't even his real name or picture. That idea made things even scarier. If I didn't know who this person was, how was I supposed to protect myself? I locked all the doors and windows in my apartment after that. I became paranoid, constantly checking over my shoulder when I left the house, feeling like I was being watched. I couldn't shake the anxiety that had taken over. I stopped going out alone, and even when I was at home I felt vulnerable. That's around the time I started dating a guy named Kyle. We met through mutual friends, and he was the total opposite of the stalker, calm, sweet, and reassuring. Kyle knew about everything that had happened, and promised me he'd help protect me. He told me not to worry, that the police would handle it, and that I could count on him if anything happened. It was nice to have someone like Kyle around, someone who wasn't just saying the right things, but really made me feel safe. One night, Kyle and I decided to go for a walk in a park near my apartment. It was a warm evening, and I thought it might help clear my head. We walked through the park, chatting and laughing, and for the first time in weeks I felt a little bit more relaxed. Then Kyle stopped and told me he needed to take a quick pee. He pointed toward a row of trees and disappeared into the shadows. I sat down on a bench and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started to get worried. I checked my phone, thinking maybe Kyle had sent me a text or something, but there was nothing. That's when I decided to call him. Before I could dial his number, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Kyle's number, but the message wasn't from him. It said, "He can't help you anymore." I froze. My heart started racing and a cold dread washed over me. I shouted for Kyle, "Kyle! Kyle!" But there was no answer. Panic was setting in now and I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to run towards where he had gone, but then I thought, what if it's a trap? What if this stalker was nearby and waiting for me to do something stupid? Just then, I saw an old man walking his dog. He seemed like a regular guy, so I ran over to him and told him what had happened. He seemed concerned and offered to go with me to check on Kyle. Together we headed toward the trees where Kyle had gone. As we got closer, we found him lying on the ground, unconscious. I remember gasping when I saw him. There were no signs of a struggle, no cuts or bruises, but Kyle wasn't waking up. The old man helped me call an ambulance. and we rushed Kyle to the hospital. The doctors said he had been drugged with some kind of sedative. They weren't sure how it happened, but they said it wasn't life-threatening. Kyle was dazed and confused when he woke up. He couldn't remember anything. That's when I realised that this stalker was more dangerous than I'd thought. He wasn't just some creepy guy sending messages, he was capable of physically harming people. The next day I went to visit a private detective. A friend of mine had recommended him, saying he was the best in the area for handling cases like mine. When I walked into his office, I felt a little more hopeful. The detective, let's call him Dave, had that kind of no-nonsense attitude that made me think he could handle anything. I told Dave everything, from the weird messages on Tinder to the letter in my mailbox and now what had happened to Kyle. Dave listened carefully and then proposed a plan. He suggested we set a trap for the stalker. His idea was simple but risky. I would unblock the stalker on Tinder and initiate contact. I'd act like I was giving in to his demands and agree to meet him somewhere. Dave would follow along and gather evidence like taking pictures of the guy, getting his license plate, and making sure everything was documented for the police. I hesitated at first. The thought of pretending to go along with this creep made me feel sick. But Dave reassured me that he'd be there the whole time, watching from a distance, ready to step in if things got dangerous. He said this was the best way to catch the stalker in the act. So I agreed. We decided to meet the stalker at an old cafe on the outskirts of town. It was in a rural area, far away from any busy places. Dave and I arrived separately in different cars. I walked into the cafe feeling like my heart was about to explode. It was almost empty, with just a couple of truckers sitting at the counter and one man reading a newspaper in the corner. Then the stalker walked in. He looked different from his Tinder pictures, older, rougher. His expression was cold and calculating, like he was sizing me up the moment he saw me. I forced myself to smile and pretended everything was fine. We sat down and started talking. The conversation was strange. He acted more normal than he had in his messages, talking about his job and hobbies like this was just a regular date. But I knew better. I could feel the tension in the air. I glanced over at Dave, who was sitting at a table across the room, pretending to be a customer. Toward the end of the date, the stalker offered to walk me to his car. I told him no, and to my surprise, he didn't get angry. He just nodded and said he'd be leaving. He walked out of the cafe, and I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me. But then I turned to look for Dave. He wasn't at his table anymore. I waited for a few minutes, thinking maybe he'd gone to the bathroom or stepped outside, but he didn't come back. I started to panic. Where was he? I asked the bartender if he'd seen the man sitting at the back, but he just shrugged. There were only a couple of other customers left, and none of them seemed to have noticed anything strange. My heart was racing as I grabbed my stuff and hurried outside. It was getting dark and the parking lot felt eerily empty. As I walked toward my car, I suddenly felt a presence behind me. Someone was following me. My instincts kicked in and I turned around quickly, shoving whoever it was behind me with all my strength. They stumbled back and I took off running toward the road. I didn't look back. All I could think about was getting away. Thankfully, a car pulled up as I reached the road. A couple was inside and I waved them down frantically. They let me in and I explained what had just happened. We called 911 and the police arrived not long after, but when they searched the area, they couldn't find anyone. The next day I got a call from the police. They had found Dave's car abandoned near the cafe. There were signs of a struggle, but no one knew where he'd gone. To this day, Dave is still missing, and my stalker is still out there. I've moved to a new city, changed my name, and live in constant fear. I'm a 22-year-old guy studying at a university in the east of Germany. I decided to use Tinder to meet new people and maybe have some adventures while I was abroad. Most of my matches were pretty ordinary, but then I came across someone who seemed different, Annika. She had long blonde hair, a traditional German look, and an air of mystery about her that immediately caught my attention. We matched and started chatting. Our conversation flowed easily, and before long, we agreed to meet up for drinks in Dresden. I was excited. When I finally met her in person, I found her even more enchanting. There was something about her smile that drew me in, and as the night progressed, I found myself laughing more than I had in a long time. I was a bit tipsy by the time she suggested showing me her parents' cabin deep in the woods. "It's a bit of a drive, but I promise it'll be worth it," she said, her eyes sparkling. I agreed, feeling adventurous and trusting her vibe. The drive felt long, but it didn't matter. We chatted about everything, school, interest, life, and I was captivated. The road twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the forest, the trees thickening around us. I could see the excitement in Annika's eyes. She loved this place, and I was happy to be sharing it with her. Eventually we arrived at the cabin. It was small and rustic, with weathered wood and a chimney puffing out a thin trail of smoke. As we stepped inside, the musty smell hit me. Dust floated in the air, making me sneeze. The place was charming in its own way, with old furniture and a fireplace that seemed to be the focal point of the room. "Make yourself comfortable," Annika said, gesturing to the worn-out couch by the fireplace. I sat down, and she went about lighting a fire, her movements graceful and confident. The flames crackled to life, casting flickering shadows on the walls. I glanced around and noticed that there were no signs of modern life. No TV, no Wi-Fi. It felt like we were cut off from the outside world. "Do you want to drink something? I have some special beer from the region," she offered. I nodded eagerly. I was still feeling the effects of the drinks we had earlier. As she went to get the drinks, I took in my surroundings. The walls were adorned with various hunting trophies, antlers, a stuffed deer head, and even a few framed pictures of her family with their hunting kills. It was all very intense. But I pushed the unease aside, reminding myself that Annika was just a girl inviting me to enjoy a weekend in the woods. "Hey, where are the toilets?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. She pointed down a dimly lit hallway. I walked down the corridor looking for the bathroom. Instead, I opened the wrong door. My heart dropped when I saw what was inside. A room filled with knives, machetes, and other deadly tools hanging neatly on the walls. It was clean, almost too clean, and the sight made my stomach turn. I quickly closed the door and made my way to the bathroom, my mind racing. After taking care of business, I returned to Annika, who had poured us both a glass of beer. I tried to act casual, but my curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, I saw a weird room with a lot of knives. What's that all about?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Oh, that's just my family's hunting gear. We use it to prepare the meat," she replied, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. I nodded, but the image of the room lingered in my mind, creating an uneasy feeling in my gut. Throughout the evening, Annika began cooking something in the small kitchen. I helped her chop vegetables, but my eyes wandered to the bookshelf in the corner. It was filled with various books, many of them about hunting and survival techniques. But then I saw something that made my heart race: books on cannibalism. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. What kind of family was she from? "Everything okay?" Annika asked, noticing my expression. I forced a smile, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, just a bit tired," I lied. As we ate dinner, the atmosphere grew heavier. Annika talked enthusiastically about her family's hunting trips, detailing their adventures in gruesome detail. I tried to stay engaged, but the stories felt increasingly bizarre. After dinner, we decided to play some board games to lighten the mood. We laughed and joked, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just the weird vibe of the cabin, but I couldn't ignore the uneasiness in my gut. Eventually, we moved to the bedroom. I didn't plan to sleep in the woods at first, but the drinks had worn me down, and Annika's presence was comforting. We cuddled under a thick quilt, and for a moment, everything felt right. But then, Annika leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear. "You know, my family has a fascination with dissecting animals," she whispered. "It's an art, really, understanding how everything works inside." I tensed at her words. It felt too intimate, too strange. I was trying to ignore the creepy vibes I'd been feeling all night, but this was the last straw. I had to speak up. That sounds interesting, but I'm not really into that kind of thing," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Annika chuckled softly. "Oh, it's just a joke. I promise I won't hurt you." Her eyes sparkled in the dim light, but something in her tone felt off. I didn't find it funny at all. I felt my heart racing. "Look, can you drive me back to town? I didn't plan on staying the night." Her expression changed instantly. "What? Why would you want to leave? We're having fun." I tried to explain, but she just shook her head, refusing to budge. "It's late and it's dangerous to drive out here at night. I can't take you back now." A surge of panic hit me. This was not a normal reaction. I was now on high alert. "Annika, please, I really need to go," I insisted, my voice firm. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Fine, if you really want to leave, I'll drive you back. But you don't need to be so scared, I promise it's all in good fun." I couldn't tell if she was genuinely trying to reassure me, or if there was something more sinister lurking behind her words. We got dressed and she led me out of the room. The cosy atmosphere of the cabin suddenly felt suffocating. "Wait," I said, stopping in my tracks. "Can I just check something first?" Annika frowned but nodded. I turned back toward the hallway where I'd seen the room full of knives. I needed to know what else was in that room. I opened the door again, and the sight made my stomach drop. The room was filled with an assortment of tools, all gleaming under the low light. There were blades of every shape and size, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I quickly stepped back, almost bumping into Annika. "See, just some tools, nothing to worry about," she said, her voice low and calm, but it felt threatening. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Right, let's just go." As we stepped outside, the night air hit me like a wave. It was refreshing, but also cold and heavy. Annika led me to her car, and as I got in, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. I wanted to put as much distance between myself and the cabin as possible. As she drove, the trees loomed ominously on either side of the road. The silence in the car was palpable, and I could feel the tension building. I stole glances at Annika, who seemed focused on the road ahead, but there was a smirk playing at the corner of her lips. "Why are you so tense?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "It was just a joke, remember?" I forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. "Yeah, right." She looked over at me, her expression serious. "You should really learn to relax, it's just a bit of fun." "Fun? You think this is fun?" I shot back, unable to keep my frustration in check. "You're talking about dissecting animals like it's no big deal. That's not normal, Annika." She turned her gaze back to the road, her grip tightening on the wheel. "Normal is subjective, don't you think?" I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. I was trapped in a car with someone who didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of what she was saying. "Just take me back to town, please," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. The drive felt longer than it had on the way there, the darkness closing in around us. My heart raced with every turn, every bump. I sat in silence as we drove down the winding road, the trees closing in around us. The tension was thick, and every minute felt like an eternity. Annika glanced at me, her expression unreadable. I could sense a mix of amusement and annoyance in her eyes. "Relax," she said, her voice sharper this time. "I promise you're safe." "Safe? You just told me your family enjoys dissecting animals. That's not exactly reassuring," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, frustration evident. "You really don't get it, do you? It's just a way of life. Some people hunt for food." The conversation was spiraling, and my heart raced faster with every word. I wanted to confront her, but I focused on getting back to town. Finally, we emerged from the dense woods, and the lights of Dresden flickered in the distance. I took a deep breath, relief washing over me. "See? We made it," Annika said, her voice lightening. I didn't respond. I just wanted out of the car. As we drove into the city, familiar sights made me feel a bit safer. She pulled up to a spot near the city centre. "Here we are," she said, turning off the engine. "Thanks for the ride," I muttered, opening the door and stepping out. "Are you really leaving just like that? We had a great time," she called after me, disappointment in her voice. "Yeah, well, it was interesting," I replied, not looking back. I hurried away, wanting to put distance between us. Once I reached the main street, I took a moment to breathe deeply, trying to calm my lingering anxiety. The night felt safe again, and I quickly texted a friend about my narrow escape. Later, as I crawled into bed, I couldn't forget the memory of Annika's eerie tales and the strange room filled with weapons. I replayed the night in my mind, realizing that girl would definitely be one I would never forget. I was just a regular guy, 23 years old, living in a small town in California. My friends had been encouraging me to try Tinder, so I finally downloaded the app one night. After swiping for a while, I matched with a girl named Sydney. She had long brown hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that made me feel instantly comfortable. We chatted a bit and hit it off, sharing our favourite movies and music. After a few days of texting, I invited Sydney over for a movie night. I thought it would be a relaxed way to get to know each other better. I cleaned my apartment, made some popcorn, and picked out a couple of films we both liked. When the doorbell rang, I felt a rush of excitement. Sydney looked even better in person. She wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking casual yet stylish. We exchanged hellos and headed to the living room. I started the first movie, and we settled in on the couch, the dim light from the TV flickering on our faces. The atmosphere was perfect, and I was relieved when the initial awkwardness faded away. As the night went on, we laughed and chatted between scenes, sharing stories about our lives. I felt like we had a real connection, and I was glad I had taken the chance to invite her over. However, things started to change when my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw an anonymous message. "I hope you're having fun with my girlfriend." My stomach dropped. I looked over at Sydney, who was focused on the screen, seemingly oblivious to the tension I was feeling. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just a prank or some random person trying to stir trouble. But then I noticed Sydney had been getting strange messages too. She frowned and glanced at her phone every few minutes, her brows furrowing deeper each time. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of unease crept in. After finishing the first movie, I suggested we take a break. I needed to clear my head, so I went to the kitchen to grab some drinks. As I opened the fridge, I glanced at my phone again. Another message came in. "You don't know what you're getting into." My heart raced. Who was sending these? And why were they targeting us? I returned to the living room, and Sydney was still on her phone, her expression shifting from confusion to fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, I just got a weird message," she replied, biting her lip. "It's from an unknown number. They keep asking who I'm with." This was getting serious. "What does it say?" I asked, feeling my pulse quicken. She hesitated, glancing down at her screen before responding. "They're asking if I'm having fun and saying something about needing to be careful." My mind raced as I processed her words. Someone was watching us, and it was clear they knew we were together. I tried to stay calm, but the pit in my stomach was growing. "Maybe it's just someone messing with you," I suggested, trying to reassure both her and myself. Sydney nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I wanted to protect her, but I was also scared. As we continued talking, I heard a noise outside the window. It sounded like footsteps crunching on gravel. I froze, my heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a murmur. "Hear what?" Sydney looked at me, confused. "Footsteps. Outside." I got up from the couch, creeping toward the window. I peeked through the blinds, my hands shaking. At first, I didn't see anything, just the quiet street outside, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. But then I noticed a shadow moving in the corner of my eye, and I felt the urge to panic. "Sydney, we need to hide," I said urgently. "I think someone is out there." Her eyes widened and she started to breathe faster. "What? Are you serious?" "Yes, just trust me. Get behind the couch," I instructed. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded and quickly crouched down. I moved to the front door, locking it and peeking through the peephole. My mind was racing. Who was out there? Was it the person texting us? The footsteps grew louder, and I could hear him breathing outside, almost like he was waiting for something. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This wasn't just a joke anymore. We were in real danger. "Are they gone?" Sydney whispered from behind the couch, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my own fear in check. "Just stay quiet." I moved back to the window, trying to keep my breathing steady. I waited, listening intently. The footsteps stopped. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out any figures lurking outside. Suddenly I saw a shadow dart past the window and I jumped back. "He's still here," I hissed. "We need to call the police." Sydney's eyes were wide and she shook her head. "I don't want to draw for attention. What if he hears us?" I felt trapped, unsure of what to do. "We can't just sit here. We need to find a way out." Just as I was about to move toward the back door, I heard a loud bang against the front of the house. The sound echoed through the living room, and my heart dropped. He was trying to get in. Sydney started to sob quietly, and I crouched down next to her. "It's going to be okay," I said, but even I didn't believe it. "Just stay low." I peered through the blinds again, my breath caught in my throat. A man stood at the edge of my porch, his face partially hidden in the shadows. I could see his eyes darting around, searching for something or someone. My mind raced as I realized he must be the one who had been sending us those messages. "What do we do?" Sydney whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to stay quiet and wait for him to leave," I replied, hoping my plan would hold. Minutes felt like hours as we huddled behind the couch. I could hear him mumbling to himself, pacing back and forth on the porch. I could only guess what he was saying, but it sounded angry and desperate. Then I heard my phone buzz again. It was another message. "I know you're in there." My heart sank as I realized he was aware we were hiding. "Sydney, he knows we're here. We have to make a break for it," I said, my voice low but urgent. "Are you crazy? He'll catch us," she protested. "There's no other choice. We can't just sit here and wait." I waited for the right moment, and then I told her to follow me to the back door. I took a deep breath and counted to 3 before opening it. The cool night air hit us as we slipped outside, careful to make no noise. We stepped into the darkness, the moonlight barely illuminating our path. I could hear the street a few yards away, and I knew if we could make it there we would be safe. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash. The front door had been kicked open. Panic surged through me and I grabbed Sydney's hand. "Run!" I shouted. And we took off down the street. We sprinted as fast as we could, adrenaline pumping through our veins. I could hear his footsteps behind us, getting closer. I glanced back and saw the figure of the man charging after us. "Keep going," I yelled, pushing myself to run faster. I didn't know how far we could go, but we had to escape. As we reached the corner, I saw a streetlight ahead and darted toward it, dragging Sydney along. We finally reached the light, and I turned around to see him stop a few feet away. He looked furious, his eyes wide with rage. "You can't run from me," he shouted, his voice echoing in the night. Sydney and I stood there, panting heavily. "Call the police," I shouted, and she quickly pulled out her phone, dialing for help. He took a step forward, but the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. His expression changed to one of panic as he turned and sprinted back into the shadows. "We need to get out of here," I said, still shaken by what had just happened. Sydney nodded, still trembling. "I can't believe this happened. I thought it was just a harmless date." We waited for the police to arrive, recounting everything that had happened. They took our statements and assured us they would search the area for the man. As we stood there, wrapped in blankets provided by the officers, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrifying. I learned my lesson that night. Sometimes the perfect date can lead you to a nightmare, and not everyone you meet online has good intentions. Thanks for watching. Like this video and subscribe to the channel if you like the stories.